Could AI become the ultimate tool for bad actors? Gary Ackerman, a security and threat assessment expert at the University at Albany Center for Advanced Red Teaming, specializes in understanding how emerging technologies could be misused in ways we aren't prepared for. In this guest lecture, he joins Beatrice Erkers in conversation to explore the biggest security risks AI could pose and, more importantly, how we can anticipate and mitigate them through effective red teaming. They dive into what makes red teaming successful, why it's essential, and how it can help us stay ahead of potential AI threats.
Well, I'm very excited to be here with Gary Ackerman. So, Gary, let's dive into it. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about all the work that you're doing?
Thank you very much, Beatrice. We're doing a lot of interesting work in this area, and we're excited to share some of our work. I am in my academic role, a professor of Homeland Security at the University at Albany in New York State. I'm also the founder and a senior researcher at the Center for Advanced Red Teaming, which is the world's first kind of academic institute devoted to researching and improving the art and science of red teaming. And on another side, I'm also the CEO of Nemesis Insights, which is a company which employs red teaming tools to answer strategic questions. I spend a lot of my time thinking about scenario planning, red teaming, and the future.
It's very interesting, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about what you guys are doing with that. I think maybe to start, it's good to think about just the basics of it. Maybe could you just give people a primer? What is red teaming and how can you be, because at this point in the course, the people will have built out a scenario basically of the future, and we're going to ask them to like red team this scenario. So what makes a good red team? That would also be interesting to hear.
Yeah, that's a great question. People have different definitions for red teaming. The military sometimes looks at red teaming very differently from, let's just say, the cybersecurity world. But we use the definition of red teaming as any activities involving the simulation of adversarial decisions or behaviors where the outputs are measured and utilized for the purpose of informing or improving defensive capabilities. And what that means in a nutshell is we pretend and assume the roles of the bad folks, the malicious actors, in order that through this, we measure the results to it in a scientifically rigorous way, and then use that to improve our understanding of the systems, improve our defenses, and reduce vulnerabilities in the systems to make systems more robust and enjoy the beneficial aspects of systems. So that's the way we look at red teaming. How do you make red teaming successful? I think there's a number of things that I can think of which are key to successful red teaming. The first is that you have to commit to acquiring and maintaining a different perspective. So one of the key points of red teaming is to take the adversarial, not necessarily a terrorist or a foreign state. It could just be somebody who disagrees with a particular point of view. It could be a competing company. It could be a competing litigant in a legal case. So there's anytime there's competition and some kind of adversarial relationship, it's looking at it from the other side, from the side of the competitor or the adversary, and trying to maintain that perspective, because you usually see things from a different point of view. This ties back in very closely to the whole idea of cognitive biases, that as human beings, we are always, call it beset, or we're always taking into account we're always functioning under a lot of cognitive biases where our minds perceive things in one way, which is not always necessarily an objective reality. And so one of the key cognitive biases that red teaming is supposed to address is what's called mirror imaging biases, which is assuming that other people see the world and act as we would act and see the world. And there's also kinds of others like expert bias and anchoring bias and all kinds of other kinds of biases. But the whole point of red teaming is to try and minimize these biases by looking at things from different perspectives. So one of the key areas in red teaming is that you actually have to put a lot of work into minimizing biases. You can never eliminate your biases, but you can try and mitigate their impact on your decision making, or at least their negative impact on your decision making. So in red teaming, we place a lot of effort on role immersion. We spend a lot of time having people get into role, so to speak, similar to how actors get into role in preparing for a theater production or a movie role. We always also place a lot of emphasis on helping people avoid various biases. So those are key elements when you're going into red teaming. The other one is that you have to structure red teaming to meet the goals. There's all different types of red teaming. There's all different tools you can use. There's online, digital, virtual tools. There's in-person tools. There's actual physical red teaming. There's all kinds of tools you can use. And rather than trying to make the same tool fit every problem, one of the areas is you have to try and fit the tools to meet the goals. And goals can include trying to uncover unforeseen vulnerabilities. Goals can include trying to raise awareness of issues. Goals can include training people on how to become familiar with issues. Goals can include exploring emerging issues that are poorly understood. There's all of these different kinds of goals, and you have to structure your red teaming to meet the goals. Now, red teaming can only work, if you go back to the definition of red teaming, is you're not just telling stories and acting out scenarios. You're also doing this in a way where you can collect data and you have a planned mechanism for capturing the results and analyzing the results and turning them into constructive guidance. So the first thing is you have to, once you're in your role and you're acting out an adversary perspective, which is maybe critiquing a plan or looking at how your competitor might view the plan or coming up with things that the adversary might do, you do that, but you have to record it and then you have to do something with it. Otherwise, it's not helpful. Otherwise, it just becomes a source of entertainment and it doesn't produce anything constructive. So once you've captured it, you need to capture it in a way that can be analyzed, and you have to analyze it scientifically. And then, very importantly, is to turn it into constructive guidance for yourself or for your organization. And in order to do that, I think there's three main aspects. The first is maintaining an open mind. You have to maintain an open mind to say, yes, I came up with something that it's counterintuitive, or it's something that I didn't think of before, and I don't want to dismiss that. So you have to keep an open mind about the whole process, that it is useful. The second thing is to go into this as what I call no blame game. You're going to it without any finger pointing, without saying, oh, we found a vulnerability in this issue or this system, and therefore you're to blame, and there's some punitive actions. That's completely opposite to what red teaming is trying to accomplish. What we're trying to do is to reveal unrecognized vulnerabilities and possibilities for the purpose of improving what we want to do and improving the outcomes. So although we focus on the negative, the idea is to mitigate the negative to improve the positive. So you always have to keep that in mind. It's a group effort. It's not a matter of pointing at somebody and saying, oh, you're deficient in this area or that area. It's very much about, okay, we've learned something we didn't know, and there may be some weaknesses in what we're doing, but let's mitigate those ahead of time. This is the whole point of red teaming. We're doing something so we don't have to experience those vulnerabilities in reality. We can reduce those vulnerabilities. And the last element is you really have to think of this, the next stage after doing red teaming, as change management. You have to bring in all the elements of navigating individual and organizational dynamics. How do we embrace change? How do we implement change in a way that's non-threatening, that's productive? Those are very important. And if you don't have those, you can have the best red team in the world with the best results, but you're not going to have any impact. So in order to get impact, you have to integrate red teaming in a sense of organizational change, organizational reinvention, and individual change. So that's the things that I think are key. Getting into role, minimizing biases, creating the right structure to your red teaming, capturing everything that the red teaming produces in a way that's analyzable in an objective scientific way, and then keeping an open mind and moving forward constructively with change. Okay, so that's basically, I think, a broad introduction to what I'd say are the key points of red teaming.
That's a great introduction. I think very good, and a lot of things to keep in mind, but very clear, I think. So let's dive into then, because one of the main focuses in this course is focusing on what will the future with AI look like. And that's just such a big unknown, I think, for so many people. Where would you even start if you think about red teaming AI futures? Is that something that you've done before? Like, how would you recommend going about it, basically?
So my company has been doing AI safety-based red teaming for almost 2 years now. We've worked with multiple AI developers, governments. We're a member of a number of major forums, all dedicated to how do we improve AI safety and ensure responsible AI. This is something that is difficult because AI is very new. At least the current form of generative AI and LLMs is a new phenomenon, at least broadly speaking. And it's transcended the world of computer science and coming to the world of everyday usage. But with that comes a whole lot of potential issues. The potential, it's AI has in tremendous benefits, but it also has potential downsides and has potential harm for harm, especially if misused by certain actors. So the idea now, many developers want to see AI reach its potential for benefit, but mitigate and minimize the potential for harm. So red teaming is a great tool for that. And in fact, various government and other reports have actually pointed and said one of the best ways of ensuring, or at least assessing, the safety of AI is through red teaming. It's not the only way. There's many other ways, but it's been identified as one of the keys to this process. So you do that. It is quite difficult, but it does lend itself to red teaming because AI, in a sense, now there's two types of AIs. There's the sort of super intelligence, artificial general intelligence, where AI itself, in a sense, is an independent actor with its own sentience. That's one thing that people are concerned about, but that's also felt to be a little further off. And we don't do much AI testing, safety testing on that aspect. It can be done, but just hasn't been done. And it's quite difficult because if you're looking at a completely different intelligence to human beings, that involves all kinds of complexities, especially if the intelligence is beyond human intelligence. How do you simulate that and replicate that? On the other hand, most of the work we do is more on the AI as a tool, which is the LLMs that we are using, the various other AI tools, design tools, et cetera, et cetera. What we do there is we are interested in how people interact with those tools and how malicious actors may misuse those tools. And we have a number of different approaches. So we test this in a number of different ways. So one of the key things we look at is uplift. So we test for uplift. Now, uplift is one of the things is saying, and we do this in various areas, but let's just say you find out that an AI tool can give you the perfect recipe for an explosive. And you're very worried and saying, oh, no, it's a terrible thing. However, if that same recipe is on YouTube and you can Google it in 30 seconds, it's still a terrible thing. It doesn't mean that the danger is any less. However, AI has not increased the risk or danger from what was there previously. The danger always existed. There's no increase in AI. So the delta or the uplift is zero. On the other hand, if you ask an AI a question that you can't find in Google, that you could spend, it would take you 6 months of Googling and researching to answer the question, and AI can answer it for you in 10 seconds and answer it correctly. Now AI has done something which it wasn't possible to do before. So let's just say I ask AI can it synthesize a new biological agent that can do very terrible things? And on the one hand, I would have to have 10 PhD scientists in a lab working for 6 months. If the AI can do the same thing in 2 minutes, that's uplift, that's problematic. Or if the AI can do something that humans just cannot do. So how do we test this? So we test this in numerous ways. We run red teams we have a particular scenario. One of the areas that we do, and this is a standard thing we do, of potential bad folks trying to do bad things. And we, let's just say 100 people doing it, and we have 50 of them use just Google. They can just use Google and the internet, and the other 50 can use an AI model. And you collect the data on both of those, and it's randomly assigned, and you run 100 different red teams, and you have 50 doing model only, 50 doing Google only, 50 doing the model and Google, or whatever certain normal internet search engines. And then you look at the results and you compare the results and you say, do the people using the model, do they get much further? Is the accuracy and the detail of their planning and their recipes better? How more accurate is it than the others? And you look if there's statistically significant differences. And then you go in and you can say, how did the model actually help? And if the model helped in a way that it did something humans can't do, that's very concerning. If it did something in a way that it did something humans can do, but the humans took 4 hours and the model took 4 seconds, that is a little concerning because it helped them, but it more helped them speed things up. It didn't really, they could have done it on their own. So we look at that, you look at that in detail across many different tasks. and you look at how capable the model is in doing many different things. And then you come up and saying, overall, the model does or does not improve the capability of bad people to do bad things. And that's very simplistic, but we do that a lot. And then you look at, okay, if once you find out what the model can and can't do and where the model is better than human beings or better than existing tools before the model, then you can say, what is the difference in consequences? If the difference in consequences is it makes a particular, let's just say it makes a terrorist group 10% more likely to succeed, you can measure that using forecasting and models and say, therefore, probabilistically, the outcome is, the expected outcome is better or worse. On the other hand, if it makes them not only 10% more likely to succeed, but it also makes the consequences 50% worse, then you can actually measure that, whether those are economic or social or other consequences or physical consequences. So we do a lot of this analysis. We do it often and we do it at large scale, and you run hundreds and hundreds of exercises doing different things. And you eventually start looking at which you find out which areas of the model are problematic. Then what you do is mitigation. So that's just the first bit of red teaming, which is assessment. Then what we can do is saying, okay, the model answered these questions. We don't want the model to answer these. The model answered a question, how do I build explosive X? And it gave you the perfect answer. Now we go back and we tell the model what it shouldn't know. We say, no, you shouldn't answer questions like that. And yes, those are guardrails that you put on. And then there's different ways of mitigating. One of the ways is saying, okay, the model just shouldn't answer that. So when I ask, how do I build this explosive? The model from now on can tell me, I can't answer that question because it's a dangerous question. But people generally get around that. There's a whole lot of thing of prompt engineering getting around this. But there's other methods like making the model dumber in one area. So unlearning, untraining models. So a model got smart originally because it took billions of documents and sources and put them all together. What happens if you said to the model, and it created weights that connected different concepts together? And then what happens if you decrease those weights and you said, do the opposite, decrease the weights of anything to do with this area? Not only can the model, whether or not it agrees to answer the question or refuses to answer the question, the model might just not be able to answer the question anymore. So none of these mitigation methods are perfect, but the whole idea is once you've done the red teaming, that helps you identify where the model is problematic and how to mitigate that. So you can then rerun the red teaming with your new model, your mitigated model, and you can actually see, wow, here's a group who had the model. Earlier, a group had the model and did dangerous things. Here's a group trying to do the same thing with the new version of the model. And guess what? The model doesn't help them at all. So we have actually reduced the risk long term. So I don't know if that helps, but that's one of the first things we're working on. I can tell you, broadly speaking, that a lot of the companies are taking this very seriously, the model developers. There was a big US government push and an executive order in the US to actually test and work on the safety of models and mitigate their risk. That has been rescinded by the new administration. But most of the companies, luckily, and I think responsibly, have continued saying they are going to maintain work on the safety of their models. So many companies are putting a lot of resources into making their models safe because their models are going out into the world. And they don't want their models to be, whether for their own economic reasons or their image reasons, or because they're actually altruistic and don't want to harm society, they have decided, most of them, that they want to make their models as safe as possible. So the good news is that so far, most of the companies that we are working with still want to work on the safety of their models. I will tell you also, unfortunately, there are other companies out there who do not care at all about the safety of their models, and their models are extremely unsafe. And the unfortunate thing is it's a weakest link, because the bad folks are going to very quickly discover which models are going to be unsafe, and they're going to use those models. There's a lot of good work being done, but it's not perfect by any means. And it's very difficult to control models that, for instance, are in other countries where we have no legal way of limiting what those models do.
Well, it's good to hear that most people care. I feel like if I had your job, I would become very sad about always having to think of the adversary perspective. I think we only have 1 minute left. No, it's perfect. I think we've really gotten to dive into these topics that matter here. I think just to round off, we try to focus also on the hopeful future, or the desired scenario. And it would just be interesting to hear your final reflections on.
Yeah, so I'm actually very hopeful, because if everybody is working to improve safety and create responsible AI, a lot of the things that we are doing is actually making the models have a net benefit, because if we can mitigate the risk, the models then become very powerful and safe to use for their positive areas. However, one thing I think red teaming could also be used for on the positive side is when we want to, there's the idea of unintended consequences. So we might think something is very positive and have a great scenario. Here's a good new use case or application of an AI model. And we might think that they're only an upside. Ahead of time, we can actually look and say, is that really an upside? We can red team that model and say, is this really an upside? And it usually is. There's a strong upside, but there might also be a downside. So once we know what the upside is and the downside is, we can then mitigate the downside and ensure that the upside is what we really realize, rather than be surprised that, oh yes, there's these unintended consequences or nth order effects that are actually swamping out the initial positive effect that we want. And we can have a lot better idea, because AI is very much, I view it as AI being a node in a very complex system. And when you have a complex adaptive system, not necessarily the AI model itself, but the way the AI model is used is very unpredictable and is going to have all kinds of unforeseen effects. And we see this with many new technologies, but AI, I think especially, there are going to be uses that will completely change the way humanity functions. And most of these will be extremely positive. And using red teaming is one way to ensure that we end up with all the positive and as little of the negative as possible.
That's actually a perfect note to end on. I think that it's like strategic mitigation is what we're getting out of this. And it's very important, basically, for us.
Because we all want the models to do amazing things. We all want it to make new discoveries in medicine. We want the models to help us combat climate change. We want the models to help solve distribution problems for food in Africa and Asia, et cetera, et cetera. And that's going to be great. We just have to make sure that as we're doing that, people are not going to misuse the models, because, as I always said, all it takes is one serious misuse of a model to then create a whole lot of controls and regulation and fear that can then swamp out all that the positive potential. So by mitigating the risk, you're actually improving the spectrum of positive and the positive potential.
That's actually also a really good point. That it's in the interest of the companies developing these models that they don't want this to happen. They probably don't want it because they also don't want something bad to happen. But yeah, it's good to keep
it's the same as think of it, a car company. If a car company creates a new technology for a car and the technology causes 100 crashes, even if that car had wonderful other things going on, nobody's going to buy the car, and the government's going to ban them from selling the car, and it's going to be a disaster. And then all the other great technologies that car it consisted of are not going to get realized. So what we're trying to do now is keep the AI, everything great going, and not having any crashes that are going to cause to derail the entire sort of future of AI. We don't want that.
Yeah. We have to wrap up now, but this was really interesting. And thank you so much, Gary, for giving us a glimpse of all your insight on this, basically.
I'm always happy, and thank you so much. And please continue doing the best work that you guys do.
Thank you. Likewise.